Benjamin, I think two things. First of all,
it's problematic. If you could just move a little for me, I'd be grateful. Let's see whether the line is better. Can I hear from you?
Can you hear me now?
Your line is just a bit problematic. If you could.
This is where these people, these four members of parliament who have been mandates of the people who elected them into parliament in the first place. For granted. And that going forward, anybody, now that the president has been
can discuss this later, but that for me was critical. But of course, being a lawyer himself and being a veteran in the parliament, I thought he decided on what he thought was right. But I wish that he had rather delivered a decision that would have stayed the course without necessarily pulling this to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to begin to meddle with Parliament.
Thank you very much. Of course, the issue of precedent also can legislate.
Make I my for one material in our channel on a day a 2K News and Blogs on YouTube. So I say, what are my factions or video in the Charleston? Na me dem ka say air to us. Nina say, Yankopon Yaduma, Ebusia, and some who do be na air course organ as in a Nina ye towards about a day on the 7th December. I damemenda Ebusia for there are so many things uncle for eka edefa aye about to e ho ensim bebrena na uncle for eka adwenkyere na doso o social media so ye bane se ya na kyese yenso ya bobo bia no agibi na yenso ye de ba besom ya hwefo ne atiefo nyina ewo 2K News and Blogs channel we so be ya yenso be hu de ekoso ewo social media so about we ne sent na buzua mempesem kasabet ntienko ni nkutie ensem ne fambra ye ba betenance ne edi ensem no honkomo.
Yeah, your quick takeaways from yesterday's monumental ruling by the Speaker.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning to my good friend, Dr. Draman, and others. Yes, actually, my comments are not very different from what my good friend has already articulated. But you see, he made a point at the very end of his commentary that if we are not careful, governance will grind to a halt. And that is where my concern was. I know that on the surface of it, the Speaker made the right decision, because for me, that's what the Constitution says. But in addition to the 3 points that Dr. Draman made about the basis for making the Constitution, the precedent, and whatever it is, there's also something that's higher than that. In governance, you are always looking for how you make sure your country does not slide into chaos, especially looking at the circumstance of the issue at this point. So I thought, even though, as I say, from all what I've heard from constitutional lawyers, and I'm not a lawyer, I suspected strongly that this would be the Speaker's decision. Nonetheless, I thought he would deliver a masterstroke in a way that even though he can acknowledge the factual points of the case, he could at the same time certain things into account in order to override that principal point. One, if I look at the issue of representation, for me it's important because he is going to deny 4 constituencies representation in Parliament for the next few months that we have left. And that maybe we can discuss this later, but that for me was critical. But of course, being a lawyer himself and being a veteran in the Parliament, I thought he decided on what he thought was right. But I wish that he had rather delivered a decision that would have stayed the course without necessarily pulling this to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to begin to meddle in the affairs of Parliament.
Thank you very much. Of course, the issue of precedent also comes in. Let me bring in Inusaf Hussaini, the former Tamale Central legislator. But I just want to, in addition to what you're going to say, reflect also on SAL, Central Kofi, Akpafu, Likpe, and Lolobi, right? You said that, I mean, the constituents are being denied representation. How about SAL?
Yeah.
We denied them. So what is your reflection on that, in addition to what you want to say?
Yeah, in fact, when I was kind of reflecting over this, the first thing that came to mind was SAL. The fact that these people have been excluded from representation for the past 4 years or so. And of course, that's a major concern for the issue of representation. So what is going to happen is almost similar. But, let me be clear with my good friend, Mr. Hussaini. I am not in disagreement with the rule of the Speaker in terms of the technical basis of his ruling. I think, as I say, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but reading the Constitution is clear that he made the right decision. So I'm not faulting him at all. And I think this is going to be a big lesson for the politicians, as Hussaini referred to. And I'm totally in agreement with him. So what we are saying is, look, if you want to place representation above the law, and nobody is arguing that we should undermine the rule of law, I think it's important we uphold the rule. But the point I was making earlier was simply that, when you are making decisions, as the Speaker has made, there are certain things you take into account. What in law they will call the extenuating factors or the mitigating factors or whatever. You look at the total environment, and then you make a decision that would not kind of rock the boat, so to speak. That is not to undermine the rule of law. In fact, there have been many instances where judges have made decisions, not strictly on the technicality of the law, but looking at the larger environment, they'll make a certain decision in order to maintain some sense of stability. I'm not saying this particular rule is going to upset the whole nation, no. But look, Hussaini also made a point about the Constitution addressing the issue of representation, that 3 months after you are vacated, there will be by-election. In this particular case, where is the 3 months? The 3 months not available for the constituents to elect.
Right.
So looking at this, it becomes kind of very interesting issue. And I'm happy that this issue has come. It's a challenge to our democracy, and that is how you build up your democracy. So I'm not worried about the decision, but I was taking into larger account what really are the consequences of this. Now the new minority wants to go to the Supreme Court. I don't know how long it's going to take the court to make a ruling, because traditionally, we drag issues. In this case, maybe the Chief Justice would decide to make an emergency meeting and all. Nonetheless, the fact is that, like the SAL that you referred to, these 4 constituencies will not have a representation for the rest of the ninth Parliament. That was a concern for me. But I guess we will find a way to deal with that as we go along.
All right. Let me bring in Dr. Rashid Draman, the former majority leader, now minority leader, Alexander Afenyo-Markin, has said that
the Parliament will find a way, and I think my good friend Dramani has said it so well. It's doubtful whether the new opposition or the new majority, I should say, will be able to cooperate with government to execute government business. So let's hope that we will have a peaceful end to this Parliament, and we'll start again when we have the election. But I can tell you, this is going to create some difficulty for governance in the coming weeks.
Well, until the court rules, we'll still have to wait and see what that means.
Yes.
Dr. Rashid Draman, you have the final word.
Yes. So, Benjamin, I think 2 things. First of all,
problematic. If you could just move a little for me, I'd be grateful. Let's see whether the line is better. Can I hear from you?
Can you hear me now?
Your line is just a bit problematic. If you could.
This is where these people, these four members of Parliament who have been mandates of the people who elected them into Parliament in the first place, for granted. And that going forward, anybody, now that the president has been
and discuss this later, but that for me was critical. But of course, being a lawyer himself and being a veteran in the parliament, I thought he decided on what he thought was right. But I wish that he had rather delivered a decision that would have stayed the course without necessarily pulling this to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to begin to meddle in Parliament.
Thank you very much. Of course, the issue of precedent also comes from a legislator. He's also a lawyer, and he speaks to the issues this morning. Mr. Fuseni, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you too?
I'm well. What are your brief takeaways? I mean, you've been in Parliament for a long time. Is this strange, the ruling of the Speaker? And like you heard Professor Bafo Agyemangua say, the problem there is what this does in terms of government business, in terms of leadership in Parliament, in terms of between now and the end of the 8th Parliament and how things go. How critical is this decision?
So, let me say that this decision is consistent with the rule of law, the cardinal principles of which are certainty and predictability. That a person must be able to predict to some degree of certainty the consequences of his actions or decisions. So if you are a governance person, you must laud these decisions. That people cannot act, especially those who have voted into Parliament, cannot take the mandate of the people who elected them into Parliament in the first place for granted. And that going forward, anybody, now that the president has been defeated, anybody will know that you can't be in Parliament and seek to run on the ticket of another party or as an independent while still in Parliament, because there is automaticity involved here. Immediately you take a decision inconsistent with the constitution of your party, you lose the membership of your party. And when you lose the membership of your party, you can't continue to represent them in Parliament, because representing a party in Parliament is an office of a party. It's one of the offices of a party. That's the first thing. And with the greatest respect to Mr. Professor Agyemangua, the Constitution says that if a vacancy is created in Parliament 3 months to the election, no by-election will be held.
Right.
So to say that the Bagbin decision has robbed the people of the constituencies where these people, these four members of Parliament who have been affected by the decision, has robbed them of representation, is moot, because the Constitution already anticipates that situation. And so if it was not even by the rogue act of these members of Parliament, but by the natural occurrence of death, no by-election would have been held. And those constituencies and other constituencies would not have had a representation.
All right.
Indeed, you can't even argue on the basis of a representation. And now we scandalize. If we are going to use the basis of representation, as Professor Agyemangua has said, as a basis to ignore the implications and risk of Article 97(1)(g), because we all know that
Inusa Fuseni, your line is just a bit problematic. If you could just move a little for me, I'd be grateful. Let's see whether the line is better. Can I hear from you?
Can you hear me now?
It's better. But just a quick point before you proceed. You made mention of the constitutions of the respective parties. And yes, they do talk about the fact that, I mean, the NPP's constitution makes it clear that immediately you move from the party while you are representative, or you contest on the ticket of any party or go independent, you cease to be a member. I get that. But the constitutions of these political parties, in this sense, the NPP and the NDC, do not override, they do not subsume the 1992 Constitution of Ghana. So some have said that the interpretation shouldn't be based on what party constitutions are saying, but the fine print of the law and what it means in spirit and in letter. Is that not? Should that not be the case?
But the same constitution and the political parties law says that parties must run those institutions. Those in charge of running parties must run their parties consistent with democratic principles. So if you are a party and you are not running your party in line with democratic principles, you will breach the constitution, not. And you will breach the laws of the country, not so. So you have to take all the facts into consideration. If your party says that you have lost your membership of the party, tell me a logical ground on which you can continue to hold yourself as an officer of the party by representing the party in parliament.
Do you think Aaron Michael Quay, Prof, the former speaker, got it right in that 2020 ruling? And do you think that precedent is enough to carry forward into this arena in the 8th Parliament? Some have said that that was a mistake. In fact, I was joined this morning by the Otafo lawmaker, Vincent Akoya-Sifwa, and he says if there were mistakes then, the law is an organism that grows, right? We're all conversant with this. It should adapt to what fits the perspective of the time. It then would appear that the law is not growing per how we've reflected it. What is your take?
The growth of the law is not within the ambit of Parliament. It's within the ambit of the judiciary. And particularly, the adaptation of provisions of the Constitution is within the ambit of the Supreme Court. You cannot say that because of certain exigencies, Parliament should openly and flagrantly violate the provisions of the law. But if you go to the Supreme Court and you argue on the basis of the exigencies of the situation and the need to adapt, and the Supreme Court agrees with you, because we, the people of this country, the creed, the universal creed, we, the people, have said that it is only the Supreme Court that can interpret the Constitution. So if you go and argue before the Supreme Court that the exigencies of the situation require that this particular interpretation be put on the constitutional provision, and the Supreme Court agrees with you, that becomes the new law, that becomes the law. We will all be mandated, because of the universal creed, we will all be mandated to follow the decision of the Supreme Court.
Yes, but even there, courtesy of judicial review, even that decision could be, overridden. And I've given the example in recent times of Roe versus Wade. It just requires the apt number of people who think in a different way, and that could be overridden.
Yeah, but that is the beauty of precedent.
Okay.
That is the beauty of democracy. That is the beauty of certainty and predictability, as I told you. That is the beauty of the rule of law. So if a Supreme Court reviews a decision, its own decision, and by you, we know the Supreme Court can review it.
Okay, all right.
What the Supreme Court has offered.
Let me
reviews on the decision, it becomes strong.